Hello everyone and welcome to the Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets and discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let us get started. Wall Street indices trimmed this week's gain on Friday, but sharply rebounded in May as investors attempted to look beyond tariff-induced chaos. The brewing legal battle over Trump tariffs added to markets' anxiety as uneasy investors and small businesses struggled to cope with growing economic and trade uncertainties. Even large and larger retail companies are turning cautious amid ever-growing chaos and uncertainties emanating from the White House. The ruling by the Court of International Trade in New York strengthened the negotiating hands of key trading partners and confirmed the sheer lack of competence in the Trump administration. Let us review key economic news of this week, and we begin with the U.S. updates. The U.S. GDP shrinkage in the first quarter was upwardly revised because of the upward revisions to investments that was partly offset by a downward revision to consumer spending. U.S. consumers pulled back in April and inflation cooled as the Federal Reserve's preferred price measure approached the central bank's 2% target. For now, tariffs are not pushing prices higher in April, but consumers have not felt the full effect of import taxes as businesses work their inventory through the system. Moreover, monthly goods trade deficit in April was nearly half the size in March, driven by a 20% drop in imports. That increase in trade deficit was driven by businesses front-loading and consumers scrambling to make purchases before Trump's new import taxes kicked in. Across Europe, stock market indices registered strong gains in the week, gyrating with tariff news as investors reviewed the domestic economic updates. Passenger car registration in the European Union rebounded despite the ongoing economic uncertainties. Overall registration in the region increased more than 1% from a year ago to 925,359 units, driven by more than a 7% surge in Spain and about 3% rise in Italy. However, registrations in the Netherlands fell 4% and in Germany decreased 2% and in Belgium fell 4.8%. For the first 4 months, overall car registrations in the European Union declined by 1.2% from a year ago. In Asia, India's GDP growth in the fiscal fourth quarter ending in March expanded 7.4%, sharply higher than market expectations. For the fiscal year 2025 ending in March 2025, GDP extended at an annual pace of 6.5%, driven by the sustained spending by consumers. In other economic news, France, Spain, and Germany reported inflation levels that are close to the target rate set by the European Central Bank. Moreover, Japan's core consumer price inflation accelerated in the Tokyo area, confirming broad inflationary pressures building in the economy. Let us review key events in global bond, currency, and commodity markets last week. The yield on the 10-year U.S. Treasury edged down to 4.4% after China trade tensions were reignited by the U.S. president, but offset by cooler inflation data. Texas crude oil prices eased $60 a barrel and declined for the fourth consecutive week, and the OPEC Plus meeting next week is likely to increase output despite elevated geopolitical uncertainties. Natural gas prices in Europe edged up 10% to €35.20 per megawatt hour amid supply growth worries, and the lack of resolution in Ukraine weighed on the supply uncertainties from Russia. The euro stabilized at $1.13 as the dollar continued to face headwinds amid worries of rising U.S. debt level, higher interest rates, and an ongoing U.S. trade policy flip-flops. The yen appreciated to 143 against the U.S. dollar after the core rate of inflation accelerated in the Tokyo area, reinforcing expectations that the Bank of Japan will raise rates to moderate inflation. Let us shift our attention to major stock markets in the U.S., Europe, and Asia. U.S. and world markets rebounded sharply in May amid easing of trade tensions. However, those market gains are likely to be wiped out in June or maybe later as Trump reignites tensions with China and the European Union. The S&P 500 index and the Nasdaq Composite rebounded despite renewed trade tensions between the U.S. and China and Trump tariffs facing hurdles in the U.S. courts. European markets trimmed weekly gains ahead of the ECB rate decision next week. The Nikkei 225 stock average halted losses of the previous week, and the acceleration in the core rate of inflation in the Tokyo area supported the case for the Bank of Japan to raise rates. Hong Kong and China indices closed down after volatile trading amid weak earnings growth outlook and uncertainties linked to the U.S. trade policy. Indian market indices extended losses for the second consecutive week amid waning interest from foreign investors, and GDP growth data released after the close on Friday in the March quarter surpassed market expectations. We now shift our attention to merger deals, market movers, and earnings updates from leading companies last week. Dick's Sporting Goods agreed to acquire Foot Locker for $2.4 billion, nearly tripling its total store count. NVIDIA Corp reported sharply higher sales and earnings in the fiscal first quarter, and the advanced chip maker reiterated its outlook. Salesforce.com posted strong results, and customer management software provider reconfirmed its second quarter and full-year guidance. Macy's reported lower sales and earnings, and the department store chain issued muted guidance. Gap, the specialty apparel retailer, failed to meet analyst expectations and warned of tariff-related costs in the future of as high as $150 million. Best Buy Company reported weak quarterly results, but the consumer electronic retailer backed its full-year outlook. Bath & Body Works posted strong quarterly results, and the personal care products retailer backed its outlook inclusive of tariff impacts. Costco Wholesale said comparable sales edged up nearly 6% in the latest quarter, and e-commerce sales surged nearly 15%. Kingfisher plc, the UK-based home improvement retailer, said same-store sales increased nearly 2% in the first quarter, and e-commerce sales jumped more than 9% from a year ago. Li Auto, the China-based electric vehicle maker, reported sharply lower net earnings in the first quarter of 2025. Meituan, the China-based food delivery and super app operator, reported higher than expected quarterly results, but the company warned of margin pressures amid rising competition. Company also plans to invest as much as $1 billion in Brazil over the next 10 years and in the United Arab Emirates as a part of its international expansion plan. In the week ahead, investors in the U.S. are looking forward to the release of construction spending, business activity, and international trade balance updates. The labor market updates, including the non-farm payrolls and JOLT surveys, are also keenly awaited by investors. On the earnings front, investors are looking forward to releases from Hewlett-Packard, NEO, Dollar Tree, Five Below, PVH Corp., Broadcom, DocuSign, and Ciena Corporation. Across the Atlantic, the European Central Bank is expected to announce its interest rate decisions on Thursday. In Europe, markets are also looking ahead to the release of Eurozone manufacturing activity and producer prices, the UK's new lending to individuals, Spain's new car annual sales and unemployment change, and France's budget balance. Italy, France, Germany, the Eurozone, and the UK are expected to report on manufacturing and service activities surveys. In addition, on Friday, UK is set to release its Halifax house price data, and France is scheduled to release its international trade data. On the earnings front in Europe, investors are looking ahead to results from Sirius Real Estate, British American Tobacco, Chambering Group, Volvo Car, Wise plc, Wizz Air Holding, and Norwegian Air Shuttle. In Asia, investors are expecting the release of Japan's annual capital spending and India's manufacturing activity survey, and both countries will also report surveys on the service activity as well. China is expected to release its Caixin Price Manufacturing and Service Index results as well. On the earnings front, market anticipate results from BTS Group, Mrs. Bector's Food Specialties, Fast Retailing in Japan, PTC Industries, Prestige Estates and Projects, First Financial Holdings, United Microelectronics, and Fuji Corporation. You can review daily U.S. and global financial market news, stock movers, earnings releases, and SEC filings on ticker.com and 123jump.com. You can find the latest financial books on Rodera.com, keep up with financial industry events on eventsinamerica.com, review ETF and mutual fund performance and in-depth profiles on tickerfunds.com, and review market updates and stock movers in India on niveshak.in. That is all for today, and we will see